Hello YouTube, here with another video about Overunity, talking about how the magnetic field itself is Overunity. You consider a permanent magnet, any permanent magnet, not just a solenoid, exhibits a field that lasts permanently. It lasts for lifetimes. For example, the Earth's magnetic field, though it be weak, has lasted lifetimes, including the gravitational field. Both involve spin at an atomic level and are permanent in a sense. Thus, the amount of angular momentum is conserved throughout the entirety of the magnet's life. Every magnet involves the centrifugal force equation, and every time there's a solenoid, every time there's a solenoid, there's a current run through the solenoid, and there's a magnetic field in a perpendicular plane, but also there's a centrifugal force in a perpendicular plane to both the current and the magnetic field. This can be represented as F equals mv squared over r, or F equals mqv squared over r, as any charge moving that has a mass with a certain velocity around a certain radius is exposed to the centrifugal force as well. Here is an equation showing the exponential relationship between force and omega, or force and velocity. What's important to note here is that with a linear change in velocity, there is an exponential output of force. So here is the Overunity principle. It's right here in the equation, this squared here. In other words, if I have a linear input, I can get an exponential output. This is the reason why magnets are permanent, and this is the reason why magnets utilize the centrifugal force to sustain their field. Moving onwards, this is what a magnetic field actually looks like in 3 dimensions. It looks like a donut or a toroid that is rotating about an axis, and this is a similar image to what the toroid looks like. You notice here that there are vortices or vortices at each side of the magnet, or each side of this bubble. This is showing that the angular frequency increases as one approaches zero radius. In other words, as one approaches the apex of the tornado, there is an increase in velocity. And where there is an increase in velocity, angular velocity, there is an exponential increase of force. So towards the center of any magnet, right here, even right here, as the radius approaches zero, the velocity approaches near infinity, or the speed of light. And as this happens, the force becomes so great, the centrifugal force becomes so great, both centrifugal and centripetal, they become so great that they're able to sustain themselves over the life of the magnet. This is Overunity in a nutshell. If one were to be able to create a device that could have toroidal rotations and vortice rotations, and have the radius approach zero, and use the suction power of the centripetal force and utilize the explosive power of the centrifugal force, then one could generate a system that could last forever. That would be perpetual in its motion. For we know that the magnetic field is caused by a moving current. We know that a moving magnetic field creates a current. What's not talked about a lot is that the magnetic field itself contains a rotary component to it. In other words, this structure here is rotating. There's a rotational component to this structure. The ether is literally spinning to create vortices and toroids around, making up the geometry of the field. And because the magnetic field is rotating in perpendicular planes to one another, both radial and axial, there is Overunity within the system. Because of how fast, because of how fast the rotation is, and 2 because how great the force is. Remember, the force is exponential compared to the velocity. In other words, the higher the velocity, the even higher the force is. And because the force is greater than the velocity, if the force is able to be utilized and loop back upon itself, just like it does in this geometry, then one could have an overunity system. This is just proving that overunity exists, and that overunity is based off of rotation and the centrifugal force. What's more to know is that this input for a solenoid, the input of current, has nothing to do with the output of current. In other words, if I put a certain amount of watts in, I'll get a certain amount of watts out minus the resistance of the wire. But I will also get a magnetic field in a perpendicular plane, and that magnetic field can do work, yet it's in a perpendicular plane. So there's actually an additional amount of energy, and all we have to do is rotate the current. If one rotates the current before the current passes out, we still don't lose any current energy, but yet we gain a magnetic field. And this is what overunity is. And this is what the magnet does. The magnetic field does is it rotates the ether. Instead of current, it rotates the ether in perpendicular planes to one another. And you can see this on a ferrocell, allowing for overunity to take place within the magnet. And proof of that is that magnets are permanent. They will continue to accelerate forever and ever. If you take two magnets, they will accelerate to each other forever and ever. If you pull them apart, they'll always accelerate again, just like gravity. Gravity has a similar structure and will always accelerate an object downwards. That is a work constantly being done by both fields, and that is way more output energy than the input energy there was to create the magnet in the first place. Remember, to create a permanent magnet, not a solenoid, to create a permanent magnet, one needs to have a high amount of charge dissipated over the medium of, like, say, neodymium iron boron, and that charge will create a permanent magnetic field. That charge, the amount of energy or the amount of watts in that pulsation of charge is totally less than the amount of work that a magnet can do over its lifetime. This is proving that overunity exists within a magnetic field. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.